Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, the war of words between America and Russia has escalated today to such a level that one or two people are now asking the question, are we perhaps headed towards perhaps a major conflict in the Middle East? Why do I say that? Well, Russia's ambassador to Lebanon this morning warned that the Federation's military will shoot down US rockets and even the sources that launched the missiles. And that very hawkish language backed up by former senior Russian military officers and indeed their own foreign ministry. And returning almost immediately, Trump tweets, Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming, nice and new and smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. Well, joining me on the line is Simon Marks, LBC's United States correspondent, who is in Washington, D.C. Good evening, Simon.
Hello, Nigel.
Well, I have to say, these are, even by Donald Trump's standards of directness on Twitter, a pretty remarkable series of tweets today.
Absolutely remarkable, and it all began at dawn at the White House, as these tweet storms invariably do with Donald Trump when he woke up and he hit his telephone and started typing. And it was that first tweet, really, responding to the threat by a Russian ambassador to shoot down any missiles that the US fires at Syria, that obviously really got him going. Get ready, because they will be coming, he typed, nice and new and smart. And as you said, he concluded that you, the Russians, shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. But then, about an hour later, it's not quite as though he had a rethink, but he sought, I think, on Twitter to try and damp down some of the reaction to his comments by saying that the US relationship with Russia is now worse than it has ever been. There is no reason for this, he wrote. Russia needs us to help with their economy, something that would be very easy to do, and we need all nations to work together. Stop the arms race, ? And certainly here in the United States this afternoon, there is less of a sense that military conflict is as imminent as I think there was when the president first took to Twitter 7 hours ago. The Defense Secretary James Mattis has been meeting at the Pentagon with his Dutch opposite number, and has certainly in comments to reporters simply said that options are being weighed, and didn't fuel the idea that we should all be preparing to duck and cover tonight, and that Syrian air bases are about to come under an imminent onslaught. And certainly other officials within the administration seem to be suggesting that if there is going to be military action, it's not going to be tonight, Syria time. But of course, President Trump's meeting with James Mattis, his defense secretary, at the White House in a few hours' time, and ultimately he is the Commander-in-Chief of US forces, not General Mattis. So if he decides to double down on that message this morning, there will be some kind of military strike. But the big question, Nigel, is what would the US at this point attack? Because having telegraphed the idea that there's a military strike, something that Donald Trump previously said he would not do, the Syrian Air Force has moved substantial amounts of its infrastructure and resources away from the obvious target, the T4 air base in eastern Syria, and placed some of it behind what they hope will be the protective shield of the Russians. So very unclear hours lie ahead, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday and the day before, it almost seemed inevitable. It was a question of when we were going to get, cruise missiles being launched at Syrian military sites. This morning, it seemed to be imminent. As you say, maybe things have calmed down a bit. But it's all rather confusing for people, isn't it, Simon? Because on the one hand, we've got this ongoing Mueller investigation, which ostensibly was about, did Donald Trump or his campaign collude with Russia in any way? So on the one hand, the American public are being told by the New York Times and others that Trump is much too close to Russia. And on the other today, he's attacked Russia in the most extraordinary terms. I mean, does this neutralize Mueller, or does it just confuse everybody?
I'm not sure that it neutralises Mueller at all, because remember that I think something that has really stoked the president's ire was the decision endorsed by Robert Mueller, requested by Robert Mueller, but ultimately endorsed by other Justice Department officials, to raid the offices and residence of Michael Cohen, the president's lawyer, on Monday, that is perhaps fueling the president's desire to do something that is going to change the headlines here. And indeed on Twitter, he draws a direct connection between poor relationships between the United States and Russia and what he refers to as the fake and corrupt Russia investigation headed up by all the Democrat loyalists. He says that's the cause of much of the bad blood with Russia, as if things would improve in the relationship between Washington and Moscow if only the Mueller investigation would go away. That is not the way that things are read by many of Donald Trump's own foreign policy aides and lieutenants, including, of course, James Mattis, the defense secretary, because they say the tension in the relationship with Russia is due to Russia's alliance with Bashar al-Assad in Syria, its annexation of Crimea, its stepping back from democratic norms in terms of Russia's own domestic politics. So it's actually Donald Trump who's drawing that connection, not the people around him.
No, well, I tell you what, don't go away for a long weekend, Simon. I think you could be quite busy. We'll talk to you again very soon indeed. Thank you very much. Well, that was Simon Marks, LBC's USA correspondent from Washington, D.C., kind of saying he feels things are simmering down a little bit this afternoon after this very heated start to the day. So there we have it. The Russians say if missiles get fired, they will shoot them down. They could even go after the sources of those missiles. And boy, you know, that means US Navy ships. So it's a pretty serious statement, and Trump responds by saying, you're going to get missiles and you're going to get loads of them. So it was a very serious escalation of all of this morning, and I'm asking you tonight, do you think we could be heading towards a major conflict in the Middle East? And if you think maybe it's inevitable, given what's been said, call me on 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think, no, actually, there's plenty of time to de-escalate this, then text your thoughts to 84850, or maybe you think that actually, you know, Trump does this. He plays tough, looking to get the other side to concede, and really, he's got no intention of going to war in any way at all, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch us on Facebook and comment there too. We've not yet been censored or banned. More about Mark Zuckerberg's testimony to the Congress committee later on in this hour. All I can say is this, that, you know, I have been a steadfast supporter of Donald Trump, you know, right the way through the primaries, through the campaign itself. I even appeared on a stage with him. I went around the debates and was in the spin rooms, and I've supported, you know, a huge amount of the president's agenda. I've always believed his instincts to be right. But we are in a very odd place where Donald J. Trump, who in 2013, 18 times tweeted at Obama, you know, don't get involved in the war in Syria. It would be a mad and dangerous thing to do. And yet today, with similar circumstances, albeit slightly more serious ones, it's Trump that has been talking in a pretty hawkish way. As I say, he often does this to get concessions. You know, he said to North Korea, my button's bigger than yours, and apparently we're now going to have talks. He's been threatening China on trade. They're beginning to make concessions. He's used on the world stage to playing this hand of cards, this tough hand of cards, and getting concessions. But I, as a Trump supporter, am pretty worried by one or two of the things that he said this morning. Let's ask Brian, who's a new caller from Windsor, what he makes of all of this. Good evening, Brian.
Good evening, Nigel. I remind you of what Napoleon said about never, never, never underestimate your enemies.
Yep.
And I think Donald Trump is behaving in exactly as you described. He is a blowhard, but he has completely underestimated the ability of Vladimir Putin, who I think is the victim of 2 years of xenophobic behaviour by the Americans and the British. And if he wants to fight in the Mediterranean, you can say goodbye to most of the Sixth Fleet, because it's not too difficult to take out aircraft carriers. And as you know, the Chinese and both the Russians have weapon systems designed to do just that. But I do not think we should go to war. No way. And also, I think Theresa May should stay well out of it. And as for Tony Blair, well...
Well, we know what Tony Blair thinks. He's very, very pro-wars. But I will tell you, Brian, that Theresa May today said continued use of chemical weapons cannot go unchallenged. Now, does she mean that the last attack last week was continued use, or is she saying if they do it again? I don't know the answer to that, Brian, but it does seem to me...
If I may say so, I think this Salisbury thing is a put-up job.
What?
NSA, MI6...
I'm not discussing Salisbury right now, although there are some remarkably similar lines of argument. Brian, do you, in your heart, think we could be heading towards a major conflict?
Well, yes, I do. But on the other hand, what you said about Donald Trump saying lots of loud things to impress and affect people, which he doesn't actually mean, I'm pretty certain that's the path he's on. But it's a very dangerous path.
Yes.
Because Vladimir Putin has had to put up with this kind of nonsense from the West now for the last 5 or 6 years. And it is getting a bit rich with him, I fear. And he did say that if they force him into any kind of conflict, he will use nukes from the start. And that is the very dangerous part about this.
It's very dangerous. Brian, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Tony says by text, "Hi Nigel, has Donald lost the plot?" Sally says, "These leaders have a childish Twitter spat and forget that real human lives are on the line while they compare the size of their rockets." Mike says, "This escalation is being led by the same person you, Nigel Farage, was supporting not long ago." Mike, I still support him. I think actually in terms of the economy, in terms of deregulation, in terms of standing up to China, in terms of many things, you know, I do believe Trump's instincts are right and that in many ways he's doing a remarkably good job. But I, as a Trump supporter, have been very concerned over the last couple of days about where this is all leading. You know, if a big military strike was launched and Assad was got rid of, I think those horrible images that you saw of those children suffering after that chemical attack, I think you'd see more of that if Assad was removed, not less of it. I am very cautious about us going to war. Our track record over the course of the last few years on this is very bad indeed. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on LBC. As the Russians say, if the Americans fire missiles at Syrian military targets, that they will shoot them down and maybe even attack the sources from which those missiles come, which can only mean, effectively, the US Navy there in the Mediterranean. Trump responds by saying, "Get ready, Russia," because they will be coming, nice and new and smart. I'm asking you whether you fear we could be heading towards a major conflict in the Middle East. And I'm saying to you, as a Trump supporter, I am worried about this. You know, in 2013, his position on this was exactly the same as mine was when I was leader of UKIP, which was that we should not get involved in Syria, we should not arm the rebels, and I still believe that was the right position. If we'd done so, we would have finished up giving arms and money to people who turned out, frankly, to be ISIS. So I am always nervous about military intervention unless you've got a clear strategic end goal. And if a big military strike was launched, and if Assad was toppled, I fear that vacuum could make things even worse than they are now. And I say that even if it was absolutely proven that it was Assad's people that had used chemical weapons, that had led to those very distressing scenes that we saw of children, even if we knew that was true, that still does not mean that getting into a conflict that could lead to regime change would be the right thing to do. And that may be, from a moral position, a difficult thing to say, but it's very much what I believe. Leonard says on Facebook, "Nigel, it seems to me that Britain and America have been trying to pick a fight with Russia for a while, and Assad." Well, Leonard, you know, Putin has been that great devil that the whole of the West has looked to. But remember one thing, one of the key reasons Trump was elected was because he was so critical of previous American military intervention. So it's a strange situation that we're in. Tahir is a first-time caller to this show, and he lives in Bradford. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. You okay?
I'm quite concerned by the way this is developing, Tahir.
Oh, well, I think most of the world are at the moment, aren't they? First of all, I'd like to condemn the atrocities by Assad, be it with chemical weapons or with the normal bullet. The end result has been the same. Are we going towards a conflict? It looks like it. I think we are, and I think we need to be careful with how we approach this. The Americans are hell-bent on going into, attacking Syria military-wise. Looks like we're getting pulled into it. Do we need to go back to what happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya? We're going down the same route. It seems like we've not learned our lessons. There's a lot of hypocrisy in Trump, like he said, 2013. 17,
yeah, and then to hear he got elected, and then of course last April, almost exactly a year ago, after we saw scenes of chemical weapons being used, he did launch that one overnight strike, but we were told that was it. It was a one-off.
My question, Nigel, is why only... I understand the chemical weapons are banned in international law and whatever, but a normal bomb, a normal bullet, the end result is the same. Why didn't we do something about it in 2013? Why wait until that country has been destroyed like Libya was, Afghanistan wasn't much anything beforehand, but like Iraq was, and then wait until they've destroyed each other, and now what we're saying is, it's about...
Well, actually, to hear, they haven't destroyed each other, have they? Because Assad is very clearly winning this long-running, very costly war.
No, I'm talking about the civilians. If you look at the civilians,
yep.
Damascus is a ruin. It used to be a hub for, educational hub for the Islamic world. Nothing now, right? You look at where is it Ghouti, where
yeah.
That's, look at it all. And I think what we've done, when I say we, I mean as the West, is we've waited to see. I think we've got a hand in the atrocities. I really do. Why do it's been happening for 3-4 years, and why have we waited until now?
Do you feel to hear, I mean, we did hear from Simon Marks, our US correspondent earlier, that the language had toned down a bit tonight, but my sense is that Trump has cancelled his visit to Lima. He was going to be speaking at this summit of the Americas. My feeling to hear is there is going to be action this weekend of some kind. Would you agree with that, even if you don't want it?
There's been some movement in the Gulf, hasn't there, with the aircraft carriers, etc. So it seems like that's what he's going. The route is going down. We need to be careful. If he wants to go down that route, us here, we need to be careful and not to get wrong. There needs to be something in the Parliament to say, right, we need a vote.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, certainly, today, Jeremy Corbyn has demanded that MPs be given a vote in Parliament to authorise potential military action. But the thing is, to hear, if you give our Parliament the chance to vote for military strikes, they love it. To hear, I thank you for your call. Indeed, when there was the vote on whether we should attack Libya and Gaddafi, out of 651 MPs, only 12 voted against. I've said it on this show before. When there's a consensus, when all the politicians agree from all the parties, one thing I can guarantee you, they will be wrong. William is calling from Glasgow. Good evening, William.
Good evening, how are you doing? Nigel, actually, the last time I called, I spoke to you. I don't know if you remember, but you had a poll, and it was to give Donald Trump a 10 out of 10 or a 0. You would give him a mark.
I did, yeah.
Right? I gave Donald Trump 11 out of 10, but I'm a massive Trump fan, and I was on your show singing his praises.
Yes. And
today, in the last week, I'm absolutely... I don't know what to make of this. He's completely turned 180 degrees, and my girlfriend's Russian. I'm going to Russia on Monday.
Yes.
I'm going for a month on Monday. She's in Nizhny Novgorod. I've been going for 2 years, and they love Britain. They've got British pubs. Everything's fine. In 2 years, there's never been a problem. I've got tickets for the World Cup. I've got tickets for England in Kaliningrad, and I've got tickets for England in Nizhny Novgorod. And I'm going April, May, June, July to Russia.
William, I have to say, I've never heard of a Scot that supported the English football team.
Well, it goes back to Glasgow Rangers when they could, at one time they could have fielded a whole England team back in the 80s.
Okay.
And there's too much sectarianism in football with the national SNP. So people like me support England.
Okay, good. I was teasing. So, William, what do you think's happened to Trump then on this question of military intervention?
Well, I think somebody's got to him because, was it not just 1 week ago, Trump says that he's pulling out, he's pulling the troops out.
Yeah, that's right.
He stood on the platform with Jeb Bush and accused Jeb Bush. We've been in here for 15 years. You vote for Jeb Bush, we will be here for another 15 years. He says we're pulling out. He sat with Putin. He shook his hand. And I've been going to Russia for 2 years. And I'm watching this thinking, I was in Russia for Trump's inauguration. I was at a Rangers pub in Moscow, the Union Bar, and everybody was thinking Trump's a good guy.
I didn't know there was a Union Bar Rangers pub in Glasgow.
There's one in Moscow. My Rangers scarf's on the ceiling. The guy put it up and he gave me a free lunch. So I'm going in Monday for 27 days, and then I'm coming back, and then I'm going back in June for the World Cup.
Well, William, all I can say to you is be careful when you're there at the World Cup football. And I tell you something, William, and I thank you for your call, William. William is not alone. There are many friends of mine in America who are very, very concerned about this. One of the reasons they voted Trump was for non-intervention. Now, John on Facebook says to me, Putin needs to be stopped. He does whatever he pleases. The world would be a more stable and safer place without him. The end justify the means. So, John, let me just get this right. We're going to take on Assad. We're going to take on Russia as well. Oh, why not chuck Iran in as well? I tell you what, John, we'll call it World War III. I think that's, whoever you are, John, it's madness. It's madness. Look at the damage we did with regime change in Iraq and Libya. If we attempt regime change in Russia, goodness only knows where that leaves us. Keith is a new caller from Stourbridge. Good evening, Keith.
Good evening, Nigel. Great fan.
Well, it's very good to hear from you. And Keith, tell me. I'm a Trump supporter. I've been very open about that, but I'm concerned about this.
Yeah, I've always really liked Trump, and I really like the fact that he said that he wouldn't intervene in Syria, and he warned Obama about not getting involved in a conflict over the sort of red line issue. But
yes,
these tweets today just really worries me, and then I think about Theresa May with, you've got Afghanistan destroyed, as you've just said, you've got Iraq destroyed, you've got Libya destroyed, now Syria. It's just, when they're going to stop.
Do you think, Keith, it's a slight tangent, but do you think if these missiles do get launched this weekend, and I still feel they will, despite everything that's been said by the Russians, do you think Britain will support Trump?
Well, I'm hearing on the news that's probably what's going to happen, but I don't see how she can. Really, the British people, we pay their wages. It should be down to Parliament she should recall Parliament and give it a vote. Well, I think she will. If you ask any person on the street, this has been going on now since 2001, and
Keith, I tell you something.
Any money for things apart from war.
I tell you something, Keith. Being here, working with LBC, the one thing you see is often a political consensus. I suspect there is a majority for us to join in strikes on military sites in Syria. If you put it to a referendum, Keith, the people of this country would reject it overwhelmingly. Keith, I thank you. Pamela says, if Assad's removed, how can we be sure who and what replaces his regime? Wouldn't that be worse? Yes, Pamela, the point I was making yesterday. Absolutely. Well, the war of words between Trump and the Russians has escalated this morning to a level where some are really beginning to worry, could we be headed for military conflict? Or is this, once again, Donald Trump on the world stage making a big pitch, looking to get a concession? He succeeded with the North Koreans, succeeded in trade terms with the Chinese. He talks tough and people concede. But is Putin the kind of guy that will concede? And that's what worries me, perhaps, about this particular course of action. Meanwhile, Mark Zuckerberg is back in front of that congressional committee. Congressmen and senators there quizzing him. Some said they went rather easy on Zuckerberg yesterday, but one person who did not was Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois, and this is what he asked Mark Zuckerberg last night.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night? No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away in modern America in the name of, quote, connecting people around the world. The question, basically, of what information Facebook's collecting, who they're sending it to, and whether they ever asked me in advance my permission to do that. Is that a fair thing for a user of Facebook to expect?
Yes, Senator. I think everyone should have control over how their information is used.
Well, he was in a fair bit of trouble there, wasn't he, when he was asked those very searching questions, and he was all over the place. And I guess, in a sense, that does get to the heart of all of this. I think, actually, many users of Facebook perhaps had not realised the extent to which their own network of friends and connections have been used, and effectively for commercial purposes, not just by Facebook, but by many other companies too. And there's something else going on with Facebook that needs to be talked about. There is no question that Brexit would not have happened without social media. We'd never have even got a referendum without social media. And there's absolutely no doubt that Donald Trump could never have become US president had it not been for the power of social media. So there's an irony here. People like Zuckerberg, who've set up these organisations, are horrified by the fact that the mediums they've created have been used by conservatives to beat the liberal wing in America, the Remain wing in this country. And they've put in place some pretty tough, very, very strong new algorithms, and we've been noticing this now for some time, that appear to discriminate against those who are on the nation-state nationalist conservative wing. And Senator Ted Cruz from Texas asked Zuckerberg about this yesterday.
To a great many Americans, that appears to be a pervasive pattern of political bias. Do you agree with that assessment?
Senator, let me say a few things about this. First, I understand where that concern is coming from because Facebook and the tech industry are located in Silicon Valley, which is an extremely left-leaning place.
Well, that's certainly true.
This is actually a concern that I have and that I try to root out in the company, is making sure that we don't have any bias in the work that we do.
Well, there is bias, and I'll give you one very good example. Trump, of course, the biggest user of social media that we've seen, his pickup through Facebook over the course of the last couple of months has fallen by 45% because of a different use of algorithms in terms of who his messages reach. So this is happening across the board. There is now very, very clear anti-conservative bias taking place across much of social media. Maybe one of the good things that is being exposed by Cruz and others is the fact that this is actually going on. Back to the war of words between Trump and between Russia. Trump cancelling his trip to South America. Are we on the verge of missiles being fired into Syria? It does feel like it to me. Adrian is a new caller from Plymouth in Devon. Good evening, Adrian.
Hello, Nigel. Pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure to talk to you. So, are we headed in a bad direction here, Adrian?
No, absolutely not. I think people have got Trump wrong. I think your gut feelings is right. The only problem is, with Putin and the likes of Putin, you're not dealing with an ordinary diplomat, you're dealing with a gangster. And if that gangster gets to know how that person ticks, I think that's the end game. And the thing about Donald is, nobody knows how he works. He throws them googlies all the time.
He does. Well, Adrian, I would agree with that. I mean, he's very, very clever. Far cleverer than people give him credit for. He's great at, as you say, chucking a grenade over here, distracting people, doing things, talking tough, getting concessions. Then he makes a concession. He's very good at all of that. He wrote a book about it, Adrian, called The Art of the Deal. I'll tell you what worries me, though, about this one, is that tweet that went out this morning could not, Adrian, have been more specific. He said, get ready, Russia, because they are coming. Nice, new and smart. And I worry, Adrian, having said that, how on earth does he back down?
Well, I don't think he needs to back down. I think, don't forget, he'd only just woke up, so I think he was scratching. I think he was rubbing his eyes at the time when he wrote it. But, no, don't forget, everybody's calling Trump a nutcase, but it's not Donald Trump that's released these chemicals on children and on people. He's not done the deed. And at the end of the day, the people that he's dealing with, I'll say it again, aren't diplomatic people, they're gangsters. No. And they only respect power and strength. And if they can't see what's coming and they don't know where he's coming from, they're going. I think in the long term, I think Trump has got a feeling that Putin himself will deal with the problems that's in front of him. I don't think Donald will have to do very much, because I think once Putin's unsure, he'll do it himself.
So, Adrian, you are not concerned about this escalating?
Absolutely not. No, I think it needs to be. I'd be more concerned if Theresa May was doing it, because the thing about Theresa May is Putin can read her inside out. He knows when she's going to breathe and blink. And that's dangerous. Not what Donald does.
No.
I tell you what, I wouldn't like to sit down and play poker with Donald.
No, I agree. And I tell you what, Adrian, I wish he was renegotiating with the European Union for us and not Theresa May. His unpredictability can be very valuable. Adrian, very interesting viewpoint. I never liked at Nigel_Farage's views on anything he's ever said. But today, I must admit, he's one of the few presenters in LBC speaking the truth and making sense. Oh, I've pleased somebody. Well, that's made my day, actually. Pamela says, no, she doesn't. She said it already. If Assad's removed, what comes next? Cameron is a new caller from Hemel Hempstead.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello.
How are you?
Good evening. Well, I'm fine. I'm hoping that Trump is playing some really clever game rather than angrily reacting to what some Russian ambassador has said. But I'm just a little bit concerned, Cameron.
Well, to be honest, I'm all behind Trump. I think Russia, they've been accused of using a chemical weapon in the UK, and then they're backing Assad, who has apparently used chemical weapons in Syria. We need to make a stand and say chemical weapons are not a good thing to use, and we need to say no and make a stand and tell them they cannot use these because it is immoral.
OK, well, I'm not going to disagree with you on that point, Cameron, but can I just say this? Is it possible that Putin's backing of Assad has actually led to the biggest military defeat ISIS so far have ever had?
Probably, yes, but it doesn't excuse what they're doing now. It doesn't matter. There are rebels. You don't have to gas them. You don't have to be treating them like cattle or goats or whatever. You need to go in there and you need to tell them no.
Even Cameron,
it's not right.
Cameron, it's not right. I understand that. You know, these weapons were first used back in 1915. They were not used in military action during the Second World War at all, which is very unusual, isn't it, for technology, for a weapon to be invented and not used in the next war. There's probably no real precedent for it. Gas, nuclear weapons. We've not had a world war since. But Cameron, even if you showed me absolutely conclusive proof that Assad's people had dropped these chemical weapons, I would still say to you, Cameron, we need to be careful about our response, because we could open up Syria again to a civil war even bigger than we've seen before.
But we've seen apparently the Russians are capable of using it on the streets of Britain. Why are we going to take this any further? Why are we even titillating the fact that they're going to be able to get away with this? And now you're saying that we need to back down, we need to say no.
I'm not saying
we can't do anything. Well, what you're saying is we shouldn't be doing anything. We need to be careful. There are people foaming at the mouth.
Cameron, I understand that argument, but can I just put this point to you, Cameron, that unless you have an overall strategy and goal in terms of what you're trying to achieve, you will be blown around by events. And I mean, we've not heard Trump talk tougher than this, and May, in her own quiet way, being pretty supportive with her statement today, and similarly with the French. You know, if some massive military strike is planned, you know, have they thought through, Cameron? Do you believe that our leaders have thought through the implications of a military strike actually toppling Assad from power?
Well, it seems like the French were the people that were rallying behind the strikes, and I think Trump is thinking that is the right way to go. I think Theresa May is probably thinking no because of the backlash that the British people will have after Iraq. But
I'm less worried, Cameron. I'm less worried, Cameron, about short-term public opinion. I'm worried about destabilising a very, very dangerous part of the world and the risk of escalation with Russia. That's what worries me.
But, Tony Blair had the whole issue with Kosovo, and that turned out all right. Why is everything stained by Iraq? We need to make a stand.
Cameron, it's not just Iraq. Look at Libya. Look at Libya. Libya's been a disaster since Cameron launched those raids with Sarkozy, with gentle American backing. Look, I'm not a pacifist, Cameron. I'm not one of those people who says you should never use military action, but I'm really, really cautious about this. But hey, I get your passion. And Cameron, they're saying it's the moral thing to do and it's the right thing to do. Well, he may be right on both of those points, but where will it lead to? As we head towards an American response to the use of chemical weapons in Syria, I'm asking, could this lead to a major conflict? And the caller before the break, Cameron, young caller, making the moral case, saying we have to do something. Bob on Facebook agrees. Good call, Cameron. If we give in to them, it will get worse. And William Hague makes the argument. It would normalise the use of chemical weapons. I don't want to see that, but I don't believe that the Western leaders have got a long-term strategy. They're reacting in the short term to something that they see as being horrific. Difficult to argue that it's not horrific, but have they actually got a plan? I don't think so, and I worry that we intervene in this and we actually could open up Syria to something even worse than it's been through in the last few years. That's how I feel. Margaret is a new caller from Durham. Good evening, Margaret.
Hello, Nigel. You're worried. I am seriously worried about all this. But let me tell you this. Years ago, I visited the United Nations building, and I stood under all those glorious flags. Mm-hmm. And for a minute, I was full of hope, and I thought, there'll never be another Hitler, because all the armies from all these nations will band together and go and sort out evil. It isn't happening. Why is it always us? We don't own the British Empire. We're a little island struggling a bit with money. Why us? We're a tiny little part of the world. Why do people to look to us? And the world has come to a sorry, sorry state when we've got Trump and Putin, and with so much in common. They are arrogant, they are self-serving, and I'm afraid Trump is losing his marbles. It horrifies me that people like that have their hand on the buttons. Where are the wise leaders we used to have? We need good, solid leaders. We don't have them. And we are in no position to spend millions killing people in another country.
Margaret, you used the word evil earlier on. But, yes. Good nations would club together to get rid of evil. That's a very powerful statement. Can I just ask you, where do you see the evil in this current conflict?
The evil obviously is from Assad. If in fact he did that, that is evil. That is dreadful. He is an evil man, and he needs to be sorted. Something needs to be done to stop him. Not us. Why? Well, it needs all the countries.
Margaret, we would be a tiny part of this, wouldn't we? I mean, if there was concerted military action, America would make up, I'm guessing, 80% of it, maybe nearer 90% of it. So we would be a relatively small part of the overall thing. But would you like to see Assad removed?
I don't know.
No, because
I've seen what's happened in the past.
Exactly.
When we've removed people we
exactly.
didn't like.
And that's the problem here, Margaret, isn't it? All of the callers, the texters and tweeters, making the moral case and saying these awful things that Assad has done. And they were saying it back in 2013 and earlier too. But the trouble is, Margaret, in situations like Syria, it's very difficult to pick out the good guys and the bad guys. And those that have been the opposition to Assad in the case of ISIS have probably been even worse. In fact, certainly been even worse than him. So Margaret, I'm just saying that I just think we need to be cautious. And I personally thought that early morning tweet from Trump just went a bit too far, and it's put him
disgusting.
It's put him in a position where it's tough for him to back down. Margaret, thank you, Margaret. Well, Margaret from Durham is very worried that this could lead to major conflict. Claire says, keep our nose out. Tina says, you have to find out who launched the chemical attack first. Nigel, why would Assad do this when he's winning? And Trump was on the verge of pulling out. It doesn't make any sense, says Anne. Well, you're right, Anne, because a week ago, Trump was going to pull troops out of Syria. It's what I said earlier. Without an overall strategy, we seem in the West to be moving around, blown around, frankly, by events. Shireen is calling from Chelmsford, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Shireen.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. It's my first time to call you, and I never thought that I would.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear from you.
Once I agree with what you said, although always when I listened to your show, I was like, what is he all about? So for this time...
Well, Shireen, you're very welcome, as everybody is, to ring in, not just when you agree with me, but when you disagree with me as well, so that's fine.
I'm glad to see that you've disagreed with your friend Trump for once, and I'm glad to see that...
You're right, yeah, you're right. I am nervous about this. What do you think should happen, Shireen?
Can I make a few things clear first?
Yep.
I'm not Syrian. I'm not from Syrian background, because I know this issue could be a bit sensitive when we talk about other countries. I disagree with Bashar, but I do disagree awfully with ISIS. And I think you made it really clear when you said, what has the states done when they went into Iraq and then Syria? When it came to ISIS defeat, it was Assad and the Russians, support.
Yeah.
The other thing, one of your callers said they shouldn't be using whatever weapons they're using. I'm just turning the table around here, and I'm asking, if that was ISIS, would they be kind to the people? Would they be kind to the people that they would capture as prisoners of war? Would
they would be, Shireen, they would be utterly brutal. They'd be utterly brutal, and not just to the soldiers and prisoners of war. They'd be utterly brutal to the women and children and the civilian population too.
Can I ask you two more questions? Where are the ISIS that were there in Syria and northern Iraq? Where have they gone?
Well, 400 of them, Shireen, are back on the streets of England.
They disappeared. They went everywhere, undercover, and you know where they went. We all know that it's pockets everywhere, so that when they're ready, they'll come back. That's one thing. The other thing that I would like to ask, whether we like it or not, the American interference in the Middle East in an attempt to create the spring, the Arab Spring or the Middle East Spring, has only brought destruction to the countries that were dragged into that. Iraq, Syria, Northern Africa. So there is a lot of interference there. When somebody comes and steps in and says, right, we're going to stop all of this interference, let them deal with one another. Do not interfere. That's what the Russians are doing. They're just asking everybody to stay off so that Syria can sort itself internally.
As you say, Shireen, this is the point, isn't it? However much we may dislike Assad, we probably dislike ISIS more.
We all dislike Assad. We disliked his father. We dislike him. We know how brutal he is. However, I know for sure that ISIS is far more brutal than anyone could imagine.
No, absolutely. Shireen, thank you for calling and thank you for making those points with which I agree totally. I've got time for one last caller. Sarah is calling from Taunton in Somerset. Good evening.
Hello, it's nice to talk to you. The point I wanted to make was it's not the American or British rhetoric that bothered me today. It was the Russian response, because I felt that was a real change, and that up until now Russians have usually been very circumspect about the language they've used and tried to damp down escalation of conflict. But I feel that the situation and the things that have happened recently, both in Salisbury and other places, have in fact possibly changed their attitude to this constant assault and a series of accusations against them, which, whether they're true or not, we haven't got outside verification of, and that is what I thought was the real change.
Yes, I have to say it is a very different tone, isn't it? You know, a senator, a former Russian colonel, says Russia should shoot down these tomahawks. You know, their ambassador in Lebanon saying the same thing. There is a worrying change of language from Russia. Sarah, you're absolutely right, and I thank you. Peter asked me on Facebook, where's the rest of Europe on this? Germans have said almost nothing. Well, next week, the European Parliament's going to be in session. It will be debating this. We'll find out a bit more then. But for now, you've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show.